Superb finishing, near perfect accuracy, chock full of details, yet a little sterile and a little boring. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take a closer look at the Grand Seiko GMT with reference number SBGE001. In terms of functionality, this watch is like their version of Rolex's GMT Master 2. To keep things simple, we'll call this Grand Seiko's GMT 2 then. Now I've had this watch and its set of boxes and papers since 2018, making this video something of a 5-year ownership review. As with most of my ownership review videos, I'll start by quickly showing what's in the box before diving very deep into watch details and nuances. Probably the most detail you've ever seen on a Grand Seiko video. I'll then close things out by talking about my ownership experience over the last half-decade or so. I'm not here to sing songs about Grand Seiko, and I'll tell it how it is. Sound good? Let's jump right in. Setting the watch aside for a moment, let's see what's in the box. But before we do that, let's check out the outside first. We have simple gold Grand Seiko branding on a blue textured box. Nothing written on the sides, and let's take a look at the bottom. Grand Seiko tries to tell us here what the box is made of. Let's go open it up. You're then greeted by nice Japanese craft paper covering the inner box, but before we go do that, let's check out the documents first. We have this nice and thick instruction booklet in several languages, and the warranty booklet over here, signed and dated by the dealer. Let's set all of these aside for the moment and take out the inner box. The branding on the outside of the inner box is very simple as well. The same gold branding that we saw on the outer box earlier. We have some sort of finer texture running the top and bottom, divided by this gloss strip running the middle. Let's open it up. And again, more gold branding on a blue suede surface. We have the Grand Seiko Lion logo in the middle, followed by the Seiko corporate logo on the lower right corner. Inside we have this nice suede pillow, and we have the watch's hang tags over here, and some extra links. It's a very simple package and there's not much more beyond that. Let's put everything back together and get on with the watch. As always, we start with the watch's dimensions. The case is 44mm wide without the crown and also 44mm with it, since the crown is positioned off-center. The crystal is flat and the watch sits over 14.5mm thick. The lug-to-lug length sits at 50.6mm and the lug width is 21mm. From this, the bracelet tapers to 18mm when it gets to the single-fold push-button deployant, which has a polished and blasted Grand Seiko logo sitting on a finely brushed surface. 2 half links come with the watch, and you can see here that I installed both of them on the 12 o'clock side to clock the clasp away from table surfaces and laptop palm rests. Unlike other watches that use single screw pins that go all the way through bracelet links, resizing the Grand Seiko GMT2's bracelet is a little more tedious. 2 tiny screws on either side of each removable link sandwich a short pin that actually holds links together. I'm not exactly sure why they did this, but now you know. Working our way back to the watch case here, you can see that the bracelet is divided into 5 sections. You have brushed surfaces on both sides and the center with polished strips dividing each of them. The bracelet sides are polished, and you can see as early as now the level of precision put into the manufacture of this watch. The polishing doesn't exactly terminate on the side, instead eating into the brushed flanks at what looks to be a very consistent 1/4mm all throughout. Because the curved end links meet the watch case at an angle, you can see a strip of polish on the watch case here. The 44mm case width that I mentioned earlier can be a little deceiving. The case actually tapers narrower towards the bottom. This is very obvious when you view the Grand Seiko GMT2 from 6 o'clock. Grand Seiko probably did this for increased comfort, and it works very well in that regard. The crown's 4 o'clock position complements all of this effort too. At 4.7mm is a pretty long crown. Like the deployant clasp, there's a polished and blasted Grand Seiko logo sitting right in the middle. I wish Grand Seiko applied a little more attention to detail here and set the case tubes in such a way as to orient the Grand Seiko logo right side up in this position or when the watch is held flat like this. Fortunately, there's still plenty of detail to be found elsewhere. I mentioned subtle polishing on the edge of the bracelet earlier. All of that flows into very thin polished strips on the interface of the quadruple beveled lugs. You then get the same hairline brushing found on the bracelet on this face, followed by machine polishing, or as Grand Seiko calls it, Zaratsu polishing on the chamfers and sides. Lug holes provide easy access to the spring bars, making strap changes a breeze. I'll cover this in the ownership experience part of this video. The polished chamfers and sides then run the entire length of the case sides. Pardon the scratches here, the watch has never been polished and likely will stay unpolished for as long as I have it. One quick note, Zaratsu polishing may be a clever marketing term, but it's not all that special. Zaratsu is just a local pronunciation for Swiss Salaz polishing machines. That's it. Time and Tide published a cool article about this. I'll put a link in the description below. That said, the quality of polishing is still miles above what you find in other watches, such as this Cartier Tank Francaise. You can compare the distortions in this shot. Now that we've covered the watch case, let's turn our attention to the bezel. Both the outer and inner bezels have 24-hour marks on them to help you keep track of time with the GMT hand, which I'll cover later. While the internal bezel is fixed, the external bezel rotates in both directions. 3 clicks for each hour jump, allowing you to keep track of 3 time zones at once. While other manufacturers typically use ceramic and aluminum on their bezels, Grand Seiko chose to go their own way and use sapphire glass instead, completely eliminating scratches and fading from the equation. It's not all about durability though. The bezel may look charcoal when viewed head-on, but the sapphire glass allows it to take on this ghost gray or black chrome appearance when you move the watch around. This is easily my favorite part of the watch. Take a few seconds to enjoy it. Since sapphire is transparent, Grand Seiko even loomed the markings up to provide the perfect marriage of form and function. The loom can also be seen on the hands and dial. Before we jump to them, here's the closed case back with the Grand Seiko lion logo polished and blasted on the center. You can see fluting on this tiny ring here, narrow at 3 and 9 and wide at 12 and 6. While I appreciate the effort to exude attention to detail, I'd be remiss not to point out this abruptly wide imperfection at 10 o'clock. Right, now onto the dial. It's a very matte surface done in the same charcoal shade the bezel takes on when it's not reflecting light. Since this is one of Grand Seiko's early pieces, you can see Seiko applied ever so thinly at 12 o'clock, followed by more subtle Grand Seiko Spring Drive GMT print at 6 o'clock. This is all in line with the low-key ethos that Grand Seiko used to represent, up until around 2015 anyway. All the indices on the dial are applied. The 3, 6, 9, and 12 o'clock ones get trapezoids, loomed as you saw earlier, while thin batons fill in for the others. It's easy to see that each of these indices are beveled, but look closer and you'll notice that they're also perpendicularly striated. This lends them a color-changing rainbow-like look that's quite a challenge to get on camera. If you're enjoying this video so far, please do hit those like and subscribe buttons down there. I'm trying to grow my subscriber count and will really appreciate your help. A date window sits in line with the crown at 4 o'clock. Missed opportunity with a date disc here. Unfortunately, it could have been done in the same charcoal shade as the dial. A 72-hour power reserve indicator sits at 8:30. Full power reserve is represented by a fully shaded arc that gets lighter by the day as you run out of power reserve. Grand Seiko's attention to detail is showcased well by the hands on this watch. We can start with the power reserve indicator since we're already here. While the center pivot on this is polished and even rounded at the edge, the tip that extends out of it takes on a sandblasted look with no rounding at all. The perfect bevels on the indices can also be seen on the loomed hour and minute hands, down to the width of them. You'd think they go all the way around at first glance, but they actually terminate and slope off a little past the pivot points. Beyond their bevels, both of these hands are flat and finished with fine hairline brushing that runs lengthwise. Other manufacturers tend to stamp their seconds hand from sheet metal and stop at the flat finish that comes out of the process. Not Grand Seiko though. The entire seconds hand is polished and subtly rounded, allowing it to catch and reflect glimmers of light as it makes its way around the dial. This and the hour and minute hands form yet another favorite feature of mine on this watch. It's hard to see on camera, but the seconds hand doesn't move or tick in tiny increments either. The 9R66 movement releases stored mechanical energy in one constant sweep thanks to Seiko's Spring Drive technology. Rounding up the roster of hands is the red GMT hand at the bottom of the stack, constantly showing home time on the inner bezel. You can also keep track of a second time zone using the rotating sapphire bezel, and the GMT hand is loomed to allow doing so in the dark as well. What if you travel though? The 9R66 movement allows the hour hand to jump independently of everything else, bringing the total time zone count to 3. Just unscrew the crown, pull it out to position 1, and click away. You can even safely reverse the date disc by jumping the hour hand backwards. Now that we've covered all the details, let's move on to ownership experience. Given that the 9R66 is a very functional spring drive movement, how has accuracy been over the last 5 years? Fantastic! 0.2 seconds fast, day in, day out. It doesn't matter what position I leave this Grand Seiko in or whether I take timekeeping logs a week or a month apart. It just reliably hums along at that rate. So it's an awesome movement, right? Well, yes and no. Yes, it's very accurate and useful, especially if you travel a lot. No, it has horrendous winding efficiency. Wearing it on the workday isn't usually enough to make up for the power reserve loss overnight. And okay, my routine may be part of the issue here, but other watches such as the GMT Master World Geographic are typically able to recover their power reserve early in the afternoon. This one even has a unidirectional winding system, which is supposedly less efficient than this Grand Seiko GMT2's bidirectional one. The movement and profile of this watch combine to make this a pretty chunky piece. You can see from this angle that the bracelet links are far thinner than the watch case itself. But it's not just about size. The 9R66 movement inside the watch is pretty heavy too. And all of these factors add up. The Grand Seiko GMT2 sits unbalanced on the wrist, with the sheer mass of the watch case constantly trying to rotate the watch. It's really hard to just wear this and forget it. I covered this watch's superb finishing earlier in the video. Other than the sapphire bezel and the detailed hands, this Grand Seiko unfortunately doesn't really offer a lot of character beyond the precision with which it was made. Technically perfect, but a little sterile. I know it's a little subjective, but this was a huge factor that prevented me from enjoying this watch as much as I should have. With my other watches, I look at the scratches and wear that add up over time as patina and character. But because the perfect finish forms such a big part of Grand Seiko's claim to fame, I can't help but feel that the worth of this watch is diminished with every hairline scratch. Earlier in this video, I talked about this flaw right here at 10 o'clock on the case back. But I noticed another flaw on this watch. You can see that 0-100 hours on the bezel is perfectly aligned to 12 o'clock, and this applies to any of the numbers you can see on the upper half of the bezel. Move to the lower half, however, and you can notice just how misaligned it is. This is how 1200 hours looks like. This is how it is at 0800 hours. And here it is set to 1500 hours. Should you decide to take the bracelet out and switch it up with a strap that you don't mind bashing around, the lug holes that I covered earlier make things easy. Note that the lug holes sit pretty low on the watch though. Installing straps short of really thick ones highlights just how chunky this thing is. I have a 6-inch wrist, and the UFO-like profile of this watch only gets worse on larger wrists, I think. Since straps are much lighter than the bracelet, the weight imbalance that I talked about a few moments ago also gets worse. Grand Seiko could have made this piece a lot more versatile by reducing the slope and mounting the lug holes a little bit higher. And there you have it, full details and my take on Grand Seiko's GMT2. The SBGE001 after half a decade of ownership. If you want to see more of these, do consider hitting like and subscribing to my channel. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.